All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome, and it's happy holidays too. I see a little bit of festive in the audience. We definitely have some red on here. I see some of the, yes. we got festive sweaters, and Jenna's very much dressed for the occasion as well. So. With that, we will call this meeting to order. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We will start with and check in if there's any public comment at this time. All right. Any words from the superintendent before we get to that portion either? Nope. Yes, there's a lot of goodies in the back, so help yourself. All right, so the first order of business under item C, number 1, approve the unconfirmed minutes of the November 28th committee meeting. I know those were sent out to everybody, and hopefully you had a chance to look at them. Obviously, from the last meeting, we will have some summary later on in the meeting of obviously trying to bring some things together. But at this time, I would like to get a motion on approving the minutes for the November 28th meeting. Patrick, motion? Motion. Second. Jenna? And we'll ask you to say your name when you do it because there was like 3 people. So I was. We'll give Patrick the second on it, okay? All in favor of approving the minutes for November 28th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion is approved. Next, we're going to move into our information and discussion items for tonight. Under item D, number 1, we do have a continuation of our discussion regarding the survey, the community survey, and here to share that information with us is Paul Bentz, and we do have copies of that survey as well that are on your table. So, Paul, it's all yours.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Bentz. It's good to see you all again. I'm going to, as I mentioned last time, we talked a little bit how we do the survey, and so you have the instrument in front of you, and going to walk you through sections of it. Please feel free to stop and ask questions as you have. I'll answer them as we go. If there's something that will be answered later, I'll cover that as well. But you've got the instrument, so we'll just kind of walk through it. The survey in its current length is about 15 minutes long. That's about the high water mark of what we'd like to see when it comes to the budget and everything else that we're covering. So if there are things that you eagerly want to add, the one thing to bear in mind is that we probably would have to cut something else. So just think that through as we go through it. I'd love to keep people on the phone for 25 minutes and ask them all sorts of questions. The challenge that we run into is making sure that we have an accurate sample. So first thing that we'll start with is just the top of the instrument itself, the name, party, maybe like a different party than they're actually registered with, or maybe they don't necessarily know what zip code they live in or what area, or maybe they're feeling a little younger that day, so they'll tell us that they're a little bit younger. So all of this comes from the file itself. Those folks won't be asked those questions. First thing that we do is we do an introduction. As I mentioned last time, we talk about it in the sense of calling from the actual call firm, something like MDC Research or Viewpoint Research or folks that we use that make these phone calls. We don't call on behalf of the district itself, simply because that introduces bias for the folks that might be eager to answer questions about the district or people who might have a bone to pick with the district. So what we try to do is make it balanced, and people who are likely to take the survey, that really helps us just get through the instrument and make sure that we are not introducing any additional variables to it. So first 2 questions you'll see here are warm-up questions like we talked about. The direction of the community, right direction, wrong direction, direction of K-12 education in the community. Do you think it's headed in the right direction or wrong direction? So we'll get a gauge of those. Those are canary in the coal mine questions. Those are ones that we have historical data on. They'll let us measure and see how things are going, look at trends when we talk about what's going on with the district itself. back one. Also, we'll do a how would you measure the overall performance in educating and offering education to the students in our community? Excellent, very good, poor, or failing. This is a scale of 1 to 5. It's one of the first times you'll see this tonight. That's called the Likert scale, and what that is it gives us the ability to produce a mean score. So you'll get an idea, sort of like a star rating, like a 1-star to 5-star rating. We'll get an idea of where things are and how people are feeling about the district from a quality perspective. I will say, just so you're aware, often we'll hear about the direction of education being a little bit more pessimistic, and then the local school district being a little bit more optimistic. It's sort of the same thing we see with Congress. People don't like Congress but love their congressmen generally. It's the same sort of approach here, where we'll maybe see a little bit of pessimism about the direction of education, but we'll see a little bit more optimism about the district itself. So from here, there's 2 sections to the survey, part 1 and part 2. Because we are asking about both a bond and override, half the folks would get the bond questions first and half the folks would get the override questions first, and then they switch. The reason we do that is to eliminate any of that first question, second question bias, because you'll see as you fall down a ballot, generally what happens is you'll see a little bit of fall off, but we want to understand the value of each individual question for your benefit to understand the relative strengths and weaknesses of the 2 proposals. You'll see at the very end we ask a follow-up question that says, now that you've heard about both, would you vote yes on both? Would you vote yes on the budget continuation only, yes on the bond only, or no on both? That gets us our yes yeses, our yes nos, and our no yeses, and then our no nos. So what I'm saying, though, here is everybody who takes this survey, it will be a little bit different, because half the folks get bond first, half the folks get override first, and then they switch. And then also in that reasoning section that we talked about, where we try to ascertain what people's opinions are or what's driving them and motivating them, half the folks in each section will get some folks will get pro statements first, some folks will get those con statements first, and then switch. So everybody will get every question, but if you are lucky enough to take this survey, you might get a very different version than somebody else gets of this survey. That's all to help us make sure that we are getting accurate answers to each question, and not that we're leading people down in a way that one question might introduce bias to another question. So in this case, we're going to start with the budget continuation. And it is called a continuation and not an override, because it is an existing 15% that is on the books right now. And so why we call it a budget continuation is actually on the yes-no language, it would say budget continuation yes, budget continuation no. It would say, if it were going, say, from 10 to 15, which a lot of districts do, it would actually say budget increase yes, budget increase no. So you do have the advantage of the continuation language, so that we do that. As I also mentioned, this is a replication of the ballot language. So you'll see we say, shall the governing board of the Dysart Unified School District adopt a general maintenance and operation budget which includes an amount that exceeds the revenue control limit specified by statute by 15%. We have to include the revenue control limit, because that's what they'll see on the ballot. That is statutorily required as part of this, so we want to replicate to the best of their ability. If you recall, as I said, if I ask people, do you want to pay more money for schools, they'll say yes. If you say, do you want to raise taxes to pay for schools, fewer people say yes. If you want to exceed the revenue control limit for fiscal year 25-26, even fewer will generally say yes. But that's what is on the ballot. So we start with the pre-test. As I mentioned, we get that early gauge of where people are. And then we go into the program test. And so what that is the different programs that are funded through the override. And so these are all randomized and rotated. Some folks would get the teachers first, other folks would get athletics first, or all-day K. They will be asked all these questions, and they'll once again be asked to rank this on a schedule of 1 meaning not at all important to 5 meaning very important. What that again will give us is mean scores for each of these items that we can then measure against one another and see what rises to the top. And what we'll find is most of these will be generally well regarded. They'll all do pretty well. Most folks will think these are important. But the devil's in the details. We get to those gradations, the 5s versus the 4s versus the 3s, and it really helps you see what rises to the top. So this allows us to sort of score this section and see what comes to the top. These right now are the programs that are currently funded that you'll be discussed as part of the override. So we use those language, and we broke them down into some requisite parts. You'll see things like most of the phrasing that I have seen regarding this has arts, PE, and athletics sort of in one bullet point together. We want to see if there's something in there that stands out more than others, or if they're all about the same. So that's the goal within sort of breaking out the requisite parts. Yes, sir. No. And it's good to meet you in person instead of just online, by the way. No, actually what we, the question for those at home on our home audience, the question is, often it is seen that all-day K is listed first as one of the items. Is it because it polls well? And the answer actually is often no. One of the reasons I have seen in the past that all-day K is first is because it starts with A. So if you alphabetize the language, if you're just putting a list together, all-day K is at the top. Now, about a decade and a half ago, during the Napolitano administration, all-day K was very popular. What we have seen is it's fallen off because it benefits a small segment. Typically, it's one of the lower ones that we test. So, but we'll see that, and maybe it's back up. You just never know. That's why we do the survey itself, is because we're trying to understand, and so this comes down to even the bullet points, right? The bullet points as you list this, if you're going to put this in the publicity pamphlet or you're going to talk about it with folks, what ones to lead with. And so this is just really helpful to see what rises to the top, maybe if there's anything at the bottom. This isn't necessarily for you to decide based on these numbers which ones to keep or not keep, but really it just gives you an understanding so that you don't lead with something that maybe isn't as popular as something else. But that's a great question. We'll find out how all-day K does in this current environment. So, yes, ma'am. So the question is, if people have a question about something in the survey, are they able to receive clarification? And the answer is no. And the reason is because if they were looking at the ballot and making the decision itself, there's nobody there to answer those questions at that time. So we also, as you'll see, these are short descriptions. This is more of the marketing test here to see what sounds good to people. I get this question asked a lot. Do people understand what this means? And sometimes, no, they don't. But what we're really looking at here is these are likely voters. These are people who have a history of voting in our elections. They're going to show up and vote. So we're trying to get an understanding of what they react to. This is quantitative research, pardon me. Quantitative gets the idea of just really what the numbers are. Qualitative is if they've got a sense, if they've got a feeling. That's more of the focus group side of things. In this case, we're really just getting an understanding of if they like the sound of it or not. That's a good point. What this comment was, if you explained it to different people and gave them additional clarity, they might get different responses for it. And absolutely, if you were to elaborate, if we sat down with every voter in the Dysart Unified School District and gave them the full description, they would be much more apt to vote yes, because they would be the full knowledge of everything that's involved. What we have to do is, based on what is likely to be presented to them, what's the outcome of what they're likely to present. So that's a really good point. We don't clarify, we don't really answer questions simply because some folks may ask and other folks may not. And so if that were to happen, then we don't know what they're responding to. So that's an incredibly important point. So the next section we go into is the argumentation. And there's two sections within this, section A and B. Section A is 2 favor statements. Section B is 2 opposition statements. As I mentioned, the reason we do this is not to influence the outcome of the election, but rather get an understanding of what is driving and motivating people. Because if I were to ask 400 people, which is the size of the sample, what do you think about this? We'd get 400 different answers. So what we're trying to do is get the underlying opinion about what really is the topic that's motivating them, or what's something that they're responding to. So on the favor side, really, and each one of these arguments, what we're trying to do is give a general thesis. Just it's one single main point that we're trying to explain. Q13 is about the excellence of the school district itself, just describing its overall position within the community, how it has the number of A-rated schools that it has, the rankings of those schools. Is it a excellence? Do voters be willing to? Are they in favor of that excellence? How do they respond to that? And then number 2 is about the tax rate itself. This discussion about 15% is a continuation, not a tax increase. It's the funding that has been in place since 2000. It uses this program. Is it about maintaining the status quo? Do people want to keep this in place? This would be a section, again, if we had all the time in the world. We could test a lot of favor statements and a lot of reasons people may or may not. But trying to get an understanding, you'll see we have 2 more in the bond. And so that we picked sort of the best 4 to get an understanding. And then on the con side, what we picked is the ones that you're likely to hear, okay? And so this, again, as I mentioned when we were introducing this whole idea, this is not necessarily what we'd like folks to say, but what we're likely to hear folks say. So number 1 is about the notion of just sort of the national movement, the national discussion against public schools. And I'd like to point out that we say schools in our country are out of control. I don't say schools in the district because that's not necessarily the discussion, but being fed by the cable news and sort of the national dialogue is this sort of anti-public school notion that schools are out of control and that we shouldn't give them any more money until they get back to basics, or back to, in this case, we say, back to teaching academics and American values. So I want to be clear that I am not saying this about the Dysart Unified School District. But what we have just seen from the 2023 elections throughout the community is this is a pervasive sentiment. And so we want to see how much this sentiment exists within our community. So that's why we asked that question, okay? Similarly, this general notion that if school districts just tightened their belt, or if they just got rid of administration, if they spent their money more wisely, they wouldn't need this money. Again, I am not here saying that the district itself is mismanaging funds. So I want to be clear about that. But this is one of the biggest feedbacks that we get when I have done open-ended questions, is this idea that schools have tons of money. They have plenty of money. If they just tighten their belt, they'd have more than enough money to put in the classroom. So we want to measure that, because those are 2 statements that will come up a lot over the course of an electoral discussion. So we want to see how those measure, especially when you compare them against this notion of excellence and this notion of this is not a tax increase. So after we do those sections, we do a follow-up question, and that's, again, I'd like to ask you again, knowing just what you know right now, would you vote yes or no on this proposal? That lets us see if people are moving. That lets us see if there's any changes. That gives us sort of the solid, who are those yes folks, started yes, ended yes, who maybe is in the undecided category. It gives us a really good understanding of where folks are. I will say, in general, we start with a higher number. We like to see that number in that 60% range, high 50s, low 60% range. And then over the course of a survey, generally we'll see it lower into that 50-ish percent range. It really has to do with the fact you saw we gave 2 pros, 2 cons. We like to keep everything balanced in order to eliminate and prevent any bias. That being said, negative arguments tend to have a little bit more impact. And so we'll generally, just so you're not surprised, what we typically see is some slippage between the pre-test and the post-test. But that's something that we have tracked and monitored and can give you a pretty good gauge based on what the results look like on that one. Any questions about the budget continuation before we go on? Yes, ma'am. Yes, the question is, does everybody get both sets of arguments? And I'm happy, I'll wait next time, sorry. Does everybody get all pros and all cons? Yes, ma'am. So each person will get section A, section B, and then you'll see in the bond section, section C, section D. Everybody gets every question every time. It's just the order in which they get them. And you can see a person, for example, that might get pro, con in the first set, and then con, pro in the second set. That's great. I think I mentioned this, but I have folks all the time say, wow, that survey was really super favorable. And then I'll get a call 5 minutes later, that survey was really negative. And I'm just like, oh, you got pro, and then you got con. And it'll be the same survey with the same questions, just the order can impact how people perceive how it's operated. That's how I know I've done a good job. So on the budget side, on the bond side, this again is the ballot language. Authorized to issue and sell general obligation bonds of the school district in the form of Class B general obligation bonds in the principal amount not to exceed insert number. This is where you guys come in, and part of your discussion is what number to test. So we'll make that, you guys will have that discussion, and we'll put the number that we decide. We talked about this briefly last time, but the issue is I can't put multiple numbers in there. I can't say, would you do 150? No, not 150. How about 100? How about 75? Because that Price is Right approach, unfortunately, really the thing is they would never see that on the ballot. And what you're doing is negotiating. And so if you started too high and went low, you're doing the door in the face technique, right? Where you start with a really unreasonable number and then you wear them down into a more reasonable number. If you started with 75 or whatever it was and then started going higher, what you're doing is the foot in the door technique, which is then you're saying, well, if you go for this amount, would you go a little bit higher? And so what we do is we recommend strongly that you pick a number and that we test it. And I will say this, the general rule is really, like, there's not a ton of difference except in one spot, 2 digits versus 3 digits. Okay, so if there's a difference between, say, 95 million and 100 million, but there's not as much of a difference between 89 and 95 or 100 and 110. So it's really that the 3-digit, the demarcation is really sort of the break-even point there between the two. Obviously, there's another mark that we don't measure as much in polling, and that is the actual amount that you pay in the property tax. That can have an impact too. If it's $10 per month per 100,000 assessed valuation versus some other larger number. But in this case, scenario-wise, for what we're looking at, it will be picking a number that we can then test. And knowing that generally a little bit above or a little bit below will have a similar effect. Now, when I say the 3-digit thing, I do want to give you one warning. There is a difference between like 100 and 200. Okay, think about it. But, I was joking about this the other day, and I wish you could say this, like, how they do at the store where it's like, hey, here's the price, and we slashed it, and it was a 125, and we slashed it to 99, Unfortunately, that's not how the ballot works. You don't get to put the Best Buy sticker on there and show that it's a discount. So you have to really sort of pick a number and go with it. So I'll leave that to you as the great citizens of this district to decide what you want to move forward with there. But this gives you an idea, okay? Again, so just like we tested programs on the budget continuation side, we test projects for a bond. And again, these would be randomized and rotated. A couple of things to note. So one, Q19, for example, school safety improvements. What we're testing here between that and fence and gate improvements, safety-related communications, key card access, those are all, you might say, well, aren't those the same thing? Well, yes, they are, but words matter. And so what we're trying to understand is, do you get more benefit from being broader with the school safety improvements as a whole, or do you get benefit from any of the various aspects of it? Do people really find value in fences or security items? I did this for a fire district once, and I will tell you, we tested just, equipment, and then we tested self-contained breathing gear. For whatever reason, breathing gear was through the roof. And then we also tested emergency medical equipment, and that went through the roof. So like sometimes equipment or something more generic doesn't do as well as more specific, but you never know. And so in this type of section here that are pretty short, what we like to do is test basically pretty much anything that you would like to consider for the project and then see how it does. I'll also draw your attention to 25 through 28. Same approach. Is there benefit to describing the area in which the school is likely to be located? So you get a control of land for a new high school versus land for a new high school in the Asante area. That tells us, does that really improve Asante and that sort of general area's number? Does it reduce the number other places? Is the idea of just a new high school more attractive than a new high school with the location? That doesn't mean we're hiding it. It just means how we talk about it can be helpful. Same thing with an elementary school. Elementary school in the Northwest Asante area or a new elementary school. And then 2 below that, facility renovations versus facility modernization. Gets us an idea, and we've been going back and forth with this. I've worked on several school districts with this. What works better? So, this is really helps us understand, do people care more about those renovations and more about those modernization? And is there a difference? Because sometimes we get locked into sort of, they all mean the same thing. And what we find actually when we do this is sometimes in the mind of voters, they don't. Like all day K versus full day K. That's another one that just, they're the same thing, but they're a little different. And so we try to test the various items here, and then we broke out some of the renovations, HVAC and air conditioning, roof repair, mechanical and electrical upgrades, to get an idea if any of the requisite parts does better than the whole. This is all about just making sure that we have the best language in place to help people understand what's out there. This list is not necessarily, it'll give you a good gauge if there's anything that really stands out as really high, or if there's anything that stands out as really low. You're not looking at athletic facilities or anything like that right now, at least in this current set. Sometimes we see some variation among those, but this will give you scores that you can then look at and say, people really think this is important. They think these 3 things are the most important. And then again, what we'll find is most people will find most things important, but it'll be that variation of that level of importance that we're looking for here to give us an understanding of what people care about. Any questions about that? Fantastic. So again, pro and con, and everybody will get both the pro and con. Some folks will get pro first, some folks will get con first. And in this case, what we're testing is a general quality of life message, this notion of that our excellent schools ensure they have safe and modern classroom facilities necessary to offer the excellent education that protects our quality of life. Quality of life has been a big driver in a lot of this discussion. Remember, less than 30% or 30% or so of our voters will have kids at home under the age of 18. So we're trying to get an idea of the general quality of life of the community, and that general schools improve our quality of life is a big motivating factor. Second one is school safety and security. We have seen in the last cycle, there were several school districts that really emphasized safety and security as part of their bond program to a great deal of success. Understanding if that is something, how big of a motivator that is student safety in this environment, something that people care a lot about, and to what level. And so this again will give us an understanding of the degrees of those. Does more of a general quality of life approach, is that what's really on people's minds, or is there a more specified school safety approach that motivates people as they go through this? On the con side, bond ones are pretty easy because they're taxes, right? In this case, unlike the override, which is a continuation, the bond is likely a tax. So we do a general anti-tax message. We're taxed enough already, taxes go up, they never go down. Taxes hurt our economy and kill jobs, we can't afford another tax. Just sort of the general anti-tax message, which we also saw a lot in the 2023 elections. So understanding economically if people are motivated by the anti-tax message. And then there's a more specific one that's sort of new last year or two, which is sort of the out of control inflation and high interest rates. That now is not the time for schools to be issuing bonds and committing to projects that will have increasing price tags. So really you can see a pretty big differentiation, right? We're talking about excellence of the schools, we're talking about quality of life, we're talking about school security, we're talking about the notion that this is not a tax increase versus this national discussion about public schools, sort of the generic idea that people don't trust the schools to spend money wisely, people's anti-tax sentiment, and their general concern at the moment about inflation. So 4 pros, 4 cons, equal approach, give us really an understanding of what motivates folks. And then at the end, we do a post-test on the bond. And that gets us an understanding of where people end up with that one, same thing. So we have 2 pre-tests, 2 post-tests, gives us good apples-to-apples numbers for the 2 proposals as they stand on their own. The last thing that we do is we do one final question that is, which one comes closest to your opinion? I would vote yes on both. I'd vote yes on only the budget continuation. I'd vote yes on only the bond, and I'd vote no on both. That'll give you an idea really who that no group is. That's going to be no on everything. You know, the no for puppies and kittens, no for anything, and then the yes sort of on everything, folks. And then who's in between? That'll give you the relative strength. That can help you decide. School districts do get to decide which item they put first and which item they put second. So this allows you to give a pretty good understanding of how the 2 questions do, how they relate, is one taking from the other and vice versa. So that's really sort of the ending of that. And then we do 2 additional demographic questions, a kid at home question, as well as sort of an ideological leaning question. That's for cross-tabulation purposes. Just let us kind of look through and see how folks really sort of feel about stuff. So again, as I mentioned, this is about a 15-minute long survey or so. We are planning on getting in the field early next year, and so that we'll be able to come back to the upcoming meeting, and I will present the answers to all these questions. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Early next year. I have to look up the exact dates, but early next year, and then we'll bring the data back to an upcoming citizens meeting. Yes, sir.
Question 18, you need a number. When do you need that number?
When do I need that number? When do we need the number for the bond issue? I'll have to look at my notes.
We're actually tonight, one of that discussion items is that because we'll have heard all our presentations, we're actually going to be presenting that of what the items were as far as the amounts that we've seen presented in each area, and that gives us a chance to talk about what do we see as the proper number to put out there within their recommendation.
So early next year. I mean, I'd love it by the end of tonight, but we're going to the field right after the new year, and so you've got a little bit of time to discuss that.
We're gonna put a billion.
A cool
Paul,
billion.
Is this the firm you're going to use, or is this are they going to call it hit landlines, cell phones, both? Do we know?
Great question. So yes, we call home phones landlines, and we direct dial cell phones as required by law. So we do call. It will be a mostly cell phone sample. We call people. We don't set a quota based on cell phones or landlines. We call people based on whatever they registered with and whatever they wrote on their envelope. So over time, it's growing to be more and more cell phones over time, but we don't require that. We just use it. Now, you do have an older sample. We have a big portion of the electorate over the age of 50, and so we do have more home phones. This is 100% live caller. This will all be done by human beings asking these questions. AI has not taken this over yet. This will be all live callers. It will be done. We will make more than 400 calls to connect with 400 people, but we don't stop until we get a 400 sample that's representative. So it'll be, a couple thousand calls of folks to get people to pick up and answer. I monitor that to make sure that we are not having people hang up on us. We're getting people to take the call. If you get called, please take it. Please feel free, because you are a representative sample of the electorate. Now, don't go post, prefer if you don't go post on social media like, hey, if you get a phone call from a random person you don't know, please take it, because that doesn't benefit anybody, right? Well, the whole idea here is to get people where they are and get a response based on what they want. This is not an online survey. This is not vote for us for best of the West or anything like that, where it benefits you to have a good number. What we want is an accurate number. We want the number to be reflective of what the audience is really thinking. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Paul. And just to reiterate, that is one of the last things when we do our summary tonight. we are going to be working to discuss that piece and really moving towards a number that we feel is appropriate to take forward on the survey. So we want to hear from all of you at the very end, and so we're going to still address that. Our next item, as we move on under information and discussion, is going to be our report that's coming on maintenance and renovations, and we're going to go ahead and bring that slide show for you, put that up for you. It's on you do have copies of that. It's titled Maintenance and Construction Needs. I will tell you that the first couple slides, Mary Dell is going to give us a little bit of background related to that. It's some of the stuff that we heard in the previous meeting that Kevin Shipman had reported to us. So we're going to get a little summary here. So,
Great. Thank you, Craig. All right. Good evening, everybody. So just wanted to provide a brief update. So we will be having our Director of Facilities and Maintenance Operations here, Todd Blutter. So I'll be passing the mic to him in a second. But just to go over the maintenance, facilities, renovations needs, also just revisiting a little bit of the construction needs that were identified by Mr. Kevin Shipman, our planning administrator, at the previous meeting. So just wanted to kind of just regroup and retouch on that a little bit again. So this was presented, not at the previous, I want to say this was a couple meetings ago, if you recall this slide. So this just really provided a historical context for where we stand as a district. And if you recall, we went back a little over 10 years on what has the history been of the school district in receiving district additional assistance, which as a district, we utilize that to fund our capital needs. And then if you recall, there were those really rough years kind of from looks like 2016 through 2019, those were the hardest ones where you can see the reductions that the state had for our allocation. So those really did start prior to 2014, but just wanted to provide a general context of that number. So of the $134 million that we would have received since 2014 through 24, we were funded for $74 million, leaving the $60.6 million shortfall from the state. So what that has created, obviously, when you're receiving about $1.5 million in allocation, you can't keep up with those similar type renovations and maintenance needs that you otherwise would have. So, so that's what we wanted to kind of talk to you, provide a little bit of context on that. So this, I know Mr. Shipman provided last time, and so this is just a brief overview of where we stand on the construction and what sites were constructed during which time. So we had all the various, the green button there is the K-8s, and then we had our 3 high schools. So really we have from 2000 through 2010, we see all the really that surge in construction that we had. We were in hyper growth during that time when we were constructing, you know, in some of those years, three schools a year. And so now we're coming up on 20 years of since that hyper growth was coming up. So with that, we also did briefly talk about the cost of some of the facilities. So just wanted to put some figures out there. We revisited the K-8 school, $35 million. I mean, I've heard from some districts that did have bonds approved recently. It could obviously go up. Some schools had them at $40 million. So it depends, again, on the size of the site that you're building. But I would think a reasonable estimate is about $35 million. The high school land, again, we spoke to that northwest area and the amount of acres, about 50 or so acres would be needed. Right now, that is the approximate cost. Again, with inflation, and by the time you're able to purchase land, obviously that fluctuates. And the high school, I mean, when we look at high schools, they are like little cities. Right now, we are looking at estimates of about $150 million if you're looking at a new high school. So these numbers are large, but that is kind of the current condition that's out there. So just wanted to kind of have those figures in your mind. Yes, question. That is correct. So the question was, if you're building a high school, is $150 million in addition to purchasing the land? And that is correct. So just to obtain a land would be about $10 to $12 million. And then if you then, by the time you get the land, get that formalized, then there's still a process of actually building the high school. So it's a significant amount. Yes. Question. Actually, if you could just, Craig's coming with me.
The K through 8 school, we have land for that? I can't remember. We have the land for that, so it's just building it.
Yes, that is correct. So Mr. Shipman provided information last time. We actually do have different kind of land parcels that are available that would be appropriate for a K-8 size. We don't have something that's the size for a high school. You're welcome. Okay. So with that, I will pass the mic over to Mr. Todd Blutter just to provide a little bit of background on what are the typical types of renovations that a school district does have to incur, and just kind of historically, what funding have we received, how have we currently supported our current needs, and then just moving forward, what those types of needs would be. So I will pass that mic over.
Thank you very much, everybody. We're going to start off with mechanical HVAC. These are the main items that we need repairs on our schools. So mechanical HVAC, plumbing, flooring, roofing, winterization, which is sealing and painting, freezer, and walk-ins on the campuses. Going back to these slides, right here you can see the growth of all the schools that were built during this time period. We're coming up to 15 to 20 years right now, and that's where we're coming. Some of the equipment is starting to get worn out. This slide right here gives a kind of a breakdown per school, what we need. The first one is, if you guys can read that a little bit better on the screen.
There's a
or
chart
piece of
on
paper.
your
Yep.
table so that you can follow along.
Thank you very much. So you can see on each school, I broke it down for mechanical, plumbing, and flooring, roofing, winterization, and walk-ins. And you can see kind of a big group for mechanical. Now, we have done previous in a lot of schools that you see that we don't have the X's on, that we have covered and had it repaired by the SFB, or we've done the repairs. You guys have any questions on this one?
There you go.
Okay, so this is just done alphabetically, so it's not priority, which ones are really in need of these services right away.
That is correct.
And I will add to that, and just as far as Mr. Blutter is explaining, that portion of it, and he can add to it, is that we do have a priority list based on where those needs are. We've scaled that out over the next 5 years, really, to say when things are becoming due. And some of them are due like yesterday, and we're struggling. And he'll talk about a couple of those. And some of those, we know there's going to be elements that'll come up with those needs as we get into the next few. And he has some more explanation on some specifics and costs, but I think we got a couple questions.
Apologize if you were to answer this. I'm sorry. Who's determining that Asante Prep needs mechanical work, and like, who's making that decision? Like who said, yeah, that's probably a good idea?
We're going off of age plus the amount of repairs that we have to put into keeping
Good
keeping
answer.
the
Okay.
buildings going.
All right, good, thank you.
I'm an attention to detail guy. So Marley Park Elementary mechanical, you've got an asterisk next to an X. That means
That one, we put the asterisk on because we are currently, that is one of the top priorities of the chillers and the towers that we're currently having the most problems with. Right now, we have one of the chillers that is not currently working, and we are not being able to find any parts. They're not making anymore, and the parts that we have to send out are very expensive and very time-consuming. We've had a part out for the one unit is about now 6 months. We've sent the part out, and it's still another couple months out.
Okay, and I want to add to that too, because Todd and I have been talking about a lot of these items recently quite a bit. They right now, because of the dire need that Marley Park is in with that, obviously, and we have a time frame before we're going to need cooling. That's where he's going to explain here in a few minutes as far as what the SFB is, and he'll explain when they actually will provide emergency funds. And really, there's not a whole lot of money there, but he will explain that piece.
Yeah, right now we're currently working with SFB right now on that particular project because it's emergency. One unit is down, one unit is limping along right now that we're keeping it going. So they have, right now SFB, I met with them last week. Their funds are very low, so they are working on just taking care of emergency purposes. So usually they go out and, pick different groups of projects, weatherization, stuff like that when we turn it in. But right now they've kind of pushed all the weatherization and some projects down and doing just emergencies.
I just wanted to know if you can talk a little bit about the impact that that has on the students that are in the school, since this is an area that needs to be fixed like immediately. What impact does that have on the school and the students?
Right now, if the unit goes down, we do have a procedure coming into place that if it does go down, we will have to bring in a temporary system to keep the school up and running. We are currently working with SFB, and they have told us they would help us once we get to that point. Right now, it's running good, or it's running right now, and but we are currently trying to push it as fast as we can. I met with engineers today on it so that we could expedite it a lot faster. We have a couple questions.
And I'm going to add to that real quick too, is that we have had that situation before. So the district has emergency plans where we and some of those emergency plans might be because the day it happens, we're saying air conditioning, we don't have any other options, and we've had to move kids. We've had to move kids, or you call it a day depending on how hot it is, and you got to notify parents, that, hey, we're going to have to call it. But the other part of it too is that temporary units, sometimes those temporary units are out 3 weeks, and so then we have to be able to know if something goes down. We're ordering and we're expecting help to happen. And we had that this last, I want to say it was at the beginning of the school year, we were doing some of that element. Because you run into a situation where one of them's down and we're worried about the other one going down. So you start to plan ahead. We don't just get to that moment and then say, hey, we're done, because we know that that's not really an acceptable answer that parents want to hear in keeping school running.
And Craig, if I can just add to that too, we do have an external consultant as well. Since we have a lot of our energy management system that we put in place, we do have consultants, and in fact, we were meeting with them on Thursday again. They're analyzing this all day long. Like, they're keeping an eye on it, and they are usually kind of ones to also say, hey, we're starting to see a really high increase in this usage, or this seems to be down, and so this is the cause for it. So I know Mr. Blutter stays informed on all that, so we can start preparing in advance, or at least kind of having a contingency plan if needed.
So when you say chillers, does that mean AC?
Yes.
Okay,
There's
just
two
checking.
different types, and there is a slide that I'll kind of break down a little bit. Okay, so
Why don't you, can you back up to the previous one? Just go ahead real quick and just explain that SFB a little bit more.
SFB oversees the capital funds for K through 12, helping out with the new build and renovations of the schools. They're funded by the state, and they oversee everything else.
And Todd, sorry if I can just add a little bit. So this is the agency that we were talking about, has been appointed through the state in order to help to provide an additional supplement for any building renewal. They also provide funds for new school facilities if needed, and we fall kind of within the allowability. But really, the district has been, we've been able to take advantage of the building renewal grant program. And so this year, the SFB actually did have they've received this year $200 million one-time grant funding from the state that really just is getting depleted, which is what Todd's referring to, because districts are, having their aging buildings and are applying more and more to these grant funding sources. And so typically, they receive, I'm trying to find the number. I want to say they usually receive about 17 million. It's a much smaller number is their usual allocation. So this year, because the state they finished with a surplus, they provided them a one-time pretty large funding amount. But already, we're halfway through the year and they're already running out of those funding sources. So they are a good, it's an outlet for us to be able to receive funds from once they're out, and there's no additional funds that they receive from the state.
Is this like a viable alternative? So like if this bond goes out, or are people going to be saying, well, you can just use this? Is that?
So that's the question, is can you refer to the state? I think in order for us to we're constantly applying, so I think that's the thing. I mean, we can document, these are all the applications we're submitting. The trouble too, and this is what happened last year, even though we submit and let's say we get approved and we are awarded a grant, they don't actually give us the funds because they've run out of money. So what we're seeing, sometimes they might approve an application or they might approve a project, but they can't actually fund it. So you're kind of now in a waiting, you're kind of in a holding pattern until they receive additional allocation. Yes. Oh, I'll get you the mic.
If SFB gave us money for new chillers right now, then we could take that out of the equation for the bond.
That is correct.
That's what, okay.
And that's why they noted that asterisk, because Marley Park, we are constantly still actively seeking these grants and these additional funding sources. We wanted to provide, hey, this is where we're at, but there's these high priorities that we are, we just submitted the application. And so if it's funded, absolutely would come off the bond as a requested item.
And Todd, I don't want to give your resume with this, but you've been in the school, this maintenance facility operation for how many years now? 15 years. And we talk about what SFB is able to fund. And a lot of times they're after the ones they're really after are the projects that are becoming safety needs. So that there's something that you're in a dire strait, and they've got to help that particular district. So, and they only have a limited amount of money. So that's one of the reasons they work towards that element. So when the question too, and I think Mary Dell, when you were saying that piece, is districts then, when they do have other needs, what you do is you shift whatever your current funding is. So you just have to make other tighter decisions and make choices that maybe are going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's where you get into all the other, well, what would you, this how much money, what would you change in your spending? And that's a fair assessment, I think, for you would ask with any district. So Mary Dell, would you say, would you agree with that piece, is that then we would just look at our overall M&O budget and make decisions going into the next school year if we knew we had to do something?
Yeah, once you know you have to do, it's just like in your personal finances. Once you know you have to repair that roof at your own home, okay, well, I can't go and buy this other item that I was planning on doing. So it does affect, though, as a district, we receive a bottom line where those funds go. Ultimately, if we need to transfer some possible budget for M&O that normally sustains our salaries and benefits, and now we're really, it's tough in capital, we do need to shift over. During those years when I showed you the allocations we were getting from the state, and we're only getting $1.5 million, well, that's what funds our facility renovations, that's what funds, if we need to put a new engine in a bus, that's what funds software licenses for education. So the Chromebooks, all those types of things, we were not going to be able to do that with $1.4 million. So what we had to do in those years is take our maintenance and operations budget and transfer some of that funding, budget capacity into capital, which what that means is now you don't have enough to really sustain possible salary increases and things like that. So you're still just given a final amount. How you allocate it is going to be based on what your immediate need is.
So to the question regarding air conditioning, when I was talking about chillers and towers, this picture here is showing the cooling towers. Cimarron Springs was replaced just recently. They're just finishing the project up right now, so that's up and running. That was covered under SFB. That actually took, I think, a little over a year to get approved once we filled out the application, so that's just finishing. Marley Park, we were just talking about, this is kind of showing the 2 chillers that are inside the central plant. So it's in a central area, which is getting pumped to every unit buildings. This one, the one on the right is the one that's still running. The one on the left is right now currently not running. And then we broke down the cost renovations for the one screen. HVAC to replace a cooling tower in an elementary, it's estimated about $460,000, and we have 10 sites that need to be replaced.
And we say that over, when you look at that chart, over the next 5 years, as we see it, And just so you can look at the chart here and you can match up. That way, if you're having questions about specific schools, okay? Sorry, Todd, to interrupt that.
No problem. Thank you very much. Replacing two chillers at a high school is 1.6 million. We have one school currently that we need to replace the chillers at, and that would be Dysart.
I think it's at Willow.
Will, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, Will can. I apologize.
Todd, can you explain the difference between a chiller and a cooling tower?
The difference is the cooling tower is going to be cooling down is typical air conditioning. It's Freon inside and it's cooling down the air. The cooling towers are cooling down physically the chillers to keep it running. Correct. Correct. Sorry.
Back up a
I
little. There you go.
apologize for that. Plumbing. A lot of these buildings, we're running into the 2015 to 20 year mark where we need to replace the water heaters on campus. Right now, the water heaters to replace, they're usually 2 to 1 water heater, depending on the size of the school. To replace is about $20,000 to $50,000 to redo it. If they're the one water heater, it's usually about a 80-gallon water heater. Depending on everything is depending on the size of the school. And these are all estimates per right now. Flooring, yes.
Dysart has, I think, used ESCOs or approached ESCOs before, like performance energy contracting. Have you guys tried to approach them for this stuff, or doesn't pencil, or?
For performance energy contracts?
You've used them before, or you've, right?
Yeah, so we have had other pieces. I know we currently have the energy management system. We've had performance energy contracts, so we have some of those that, and it does get paid off kind of like a lease.
But ESCOs do this work too. But it's
Potentially,
hard to
yeah.
pencil, I know.
Yeah, so I mean, there's some that you could look at other financing sources if you have a specific amount. You don't want to go too high on some of those financing sources because they usually incur higher interest rates than a bond might typically do.
All right, understood. Thanks.
And I think those points are well taken because we have to always be looking at other alternatives to it as well. And I think, finding other ways to, we're trying to find cost savings along the way as well. Some of the things too is that we don't really get into is that you start talking about some of these new, HVAC, air conditioning. They run better and they're more efficient. And so you're seeing a lot more savings in that way. That's not why we're bringing it to you, but there are elements that will come up as well, even as talking about the types of equipment as you start to replace.
And I'll back up to mechanical to make a good point. What we're trying to do on a couple sites, for instance, Marley Park, is replacing both the chillers and the towers with air-cooled systems. So it's one unit. It would be 2 units that work together. So if one goes down, one's there for backup. That's what we're working on. So that's what we're working with the engineers on and getting information to replace both of those. So it's just not the chillers. Go back to flooring. The cost here for removing, polishing for an elementary is estimated about $300,000 per school. There's 17 schools. Polishing the high school is $450,000. There's 3 schools that still need to be done.
And explain a little. Let's talk about that a little bit too, with flooring and carpet, and why we're saying polished floor versus that. So that because I'm sure there's going to be some questions.
We're working toward like everything is pulling the carpet up, cleaning it, and a lot of the high traffic areas going to solid concrete instead of going carpet. Where areas where in classrooms, if it needs to, we do the carpet squares, so it's an easy maintenance on that aspect.
And the reason why, and some of you are going to ask the question, we've just recently redid some areas small areas at Riverview. Carpet's coming up. When we start aged carpet, it starts to come up. The cost of replacing carpet is much more expensive. And so one of the alternatives that many places are going to, and especially when you'll see a lot of buildings that are designed this way, is they'll go more to a polished concrete because it's an easier care, and that's longevity. So what you're doing is you're going to save money in the long run when you go that direction, because also you're not going to have to replace anything in that point. The concrete's forever. It's not everybody's favorite, but it is the more cost-efficient way to do it. And some of these, what we're seeing is that as we're going in, some of these classrooms, some of these buildings, we're seeing carpet start to come up, and obviously becomes tripping hazards, things like that.
That was partly my question. So the classrooms would be concrete? We'd be moving to a carpetless classroom then?
Correct.
Okay.
So when you're talking about the high schools, the polishing of the floors, it's not just classrooms, you're also talking the gym areas, the basketball courts and stuff, polishing all that stuff inside, or you're just talking main hallways in each building, in each classroom, and not?
Correct. We're only talking about hallways and classrooms and common areas.
We have had gyms at the K-8 levels. That's a different issue. When the laminate floorings have went bad, a new wood floor is extremely expensive, and we have not went that direction because we can't afford to replace one of those, especially if a floor and it happens over time. They start to come up, they warp, things like that. Some of the older ones out there at K-8 schools. At a high school, you've got it. We have to maintain a wood floor in those gymnasiums.
Any more questions on this slide for flooring or? We'll go into roofing. Roofing repairs and replacements for an elementary school is about $500,000 to $1 million to repair. We have 11 elementary schools that need it. So we're estimating, apologize.
You're looking at the elementary side right here. The roofing side to it, if you'll see the cost up there, the reason, and we went conservative side on that. Remember, if you're talking about an entire roofing, I don't know if you guys saw at Valley Vista, what's recently happened there is that roofing project, that's not, just, $500,000 over there. You're talking about a few $1 million at Valley Vista.
7.6 million total.
7.6 million in order to replace all roofing at Valley Vista High School. That was an SFB project, as far as I understood, part of it. Part of it. And then the district was involved with the other funding. I think Mary Dell could probably speak more specifically. The roofing side to it is that obviously roofing is going to have to be redone over time. Some of it's repair. Some of it's less expensive. Some of it's going to be more expensive. But a lot of times it's no different than you think about when houses get reshingled or redone. It's no different when they come in. You're talking about the buildings as over time, and you guys know as well I do, living in Arizona, the elements of how our roofs hold up. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be very upfront on that piece. But at 11 schools, it's roughly around 7.7 million is an estimate to what we believe in getting those done over the next 5 years.
Then weatherization, paint and sealing of the schools. The costs are about $300,000 a piece. There's 15 schools, estimated about $4.5 million. Weatherization to a high school, $700,000. So the total is 5.9 just to weatherize and seal the high schools. And again, this is out 3 to 5 year plan.
And so when you look at that one again, I don't know if you guys have questions on that, but that really gets into the care of your outside building facility. You're painting a large facility like that, and then when we don't paint, when you don't provide paints to a facility over time, and you guys would, you understand that element when you see that, it's not just for appearance. It has to do with the care for that building and what's gonna deteriorate over time. I don't want to get into the M word or other things like that, but things start to happen within facilities when you don't provide those types of care. It's giving you where those schools are at and what the estimated time would be to actually bring those up. It's a few schools have been painted, and you can look at the weatherization on here. Some of them have been, And then we have many that are sitting out there that are going to be coming due now as well.
Some of them we do have under, we turned in applications to SFB and some other organizations. We're just waiting on hold. Right now, SFB, and I'll go back to that, SFB right now is kind of holding off on weatherproofing unless it's an absolute emergency. And that's what they're currently working on. Freezer and walk-in installations. Each one, we have 9 schools that currently need new walk-ins. Are $170,000 apiece for both freezer and refrigerator. So the price is for both together installed. Total renovation costs we're looking for is about $28 million just for those line items for repairs currently that we are on that spreadsheet that we're in need of. Age of the schools. Next slide. Do you have any more questions on the renovations of the schools? The next slide, we're looking into adding 2 new locations for Shadow Ridge High School and Willow Canyon High School. Both locations, because of the distance between where the fields are and where the facilities are, is a little bit of a walk if anybody's been to any one of the schools. Yeah, you can, right. So we are looking into currently adding 2 new facilities in 2 different locations on the each campus there.
And I want to let you know too, and I know Patrick's on that campus. Those of you who've been on Willow's campus, what we do right now to accommodate for it, I don't say accommodate, but just the worst way to put it, but I'm just going to be very upfront, is that those are, we end up with porta potties out in those areas for people to use. Otherwise, we expect them. I know that's just a natural element, but we do direct people to use the restrooms and make sure they're open in those areas, and walk along those sidewalks to get to them.
Current community restroom facilities, the 1 restroom facility and concession stand at Shadow Ridge, we're estimated $6 million. The restroom facility concession stands at Willow Canyon, $7 million.
Tell them why those are so high, Todd.
It's mainly the sewer locations. Because of the locations of the new facilities where we like to put them is the sewer lines. They are very far away. So it's going to take a lot to get a sewer line. Water and electric are closer. Sewer is the hardest one. We're also looking into renovation of restrooms and concession stands at Dysart High School and facilities at Vista Verde, updating what's at those 2 locations. Estimated cost for the high schools is $15 million.
We wanted to bring this forward to show that element of what, because there was plans when those schools were constructed, but, and that could have just been because of the budget, and those things were not put in place at the time. But we wanted to very much bring that forward just to say, hey, that was on the table. We thought that was fair for this committee to at least present that forward because we did hear it. We also, in some of the conversations out there, and then also like Dysart High School, there was mentioning at one of our previous brainstormings about the bathrooms and the condition. So we did make sure we provided an estimate as far as that goes for a renovation.
This might be for Mary Dell. Just a question that since we're pretty much renting the porta potties for every games, whether it's football, baseball, or whatnot, because there are no facilities. What is that average cost compared to what we're going to be paying for building a new one?
As far as how much do we pay annually for renting the porta potty? I can look at that right now. I have the general ledger system. So let me look at that. I'll get back to you.
That is a good question. I don't know because it's out there all the time. So there must be something that we'll find out.
So just an update, and I'm speaking just for Shadow because I'm obviously one of the coaches out there as well. But currently, the porta potties after football season, they all got picked up. So sports continue to run: soccer, fall ball, baseball, other programs, and schools, other community needs, if you will, come out and use them. Community ed, things like that. Middle schools. Currently, there are no porta potties at that location. They've all been picked up, so they're only there part of the year. During football season primarily, and some other times they get picked up. Currently, right now, we have 0. So that long walk that I'm talking about, I'm actually going to measure it and bring you guys back a number. That is a long walk, and we've played at Willow Canyon several times. That's a very long distance. And when you talk about grandparents and some other folks that don't maybe move as good as others, we've literally gotten to the point where during games, we'll actually bring golf carts down to shuttle people back and forth if necessary. We don't have to do that, but we do it because we understand the burden that could put on them. So we are going above and beyond to get to that, but it's still a long distance. So this is a very big need.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any other questions on the restrooms? We're also proposing an upgrade of the auditorium. It's one of the oldest auditoriums that we have in the district, and it's currently original. We're looking into updating the LED light to all the lights, all the actual stage lights, and everything else to LEDs. Seating, rigging, which is curtains, so forth, and a new cyclorama, which we do not have. We do not have there. The walls actually painted white. New painting in the building, flooring, and electrical. We're estimating $5 million.
Again, an item that was brought up if you'll recall, in our brainstorming session, and so we wanted to make sure that we did some work on that and found out, if you're gutting a building like that, what does that involve? And so, an approximate cost when you talk about a renovation, and we're making an estimate there, and we looked at each of those pieces. So that's one of the things I asked Todd to do, is to give me some pricing to that element, and that's what we came up with.
So the total, we're looking for renovations that we need for facilities is $48 million. On renovations for that spreadsheet that I gave you for all the repairs for the winterization and roofing and so forth, and the renovations of the bathrooms and the auditorium.
I'm done.
Just so I'm clear, that 48 million, oh man, that assumes that SFB picks up nothing. Is that right? Thank you. Okay.
That is absolutely correct. And asking about SFB, we purposely did it that way only because of the fluctuation. We wanted to make sure it was fair to present it that way to you guys in that capacity. But obviously, that could be considered by the committee to say, hey, if that was something to say, hey, we got to depend on that a little bit. So, and we understand that.
And just following up on the question to the vendor, across the district, we spent about $20,000 on those facilities, but specifically at Willow Canyon, it was about $6,000 last year that we paid. I wanted to provide a full year's amount, so. What's that? Yeah, $5,999.82.
Yes. Question.
Sorry, I just have a question. I noticed that Mountain View wasn't on here. Are they not needing any facility updates? Mountain View Elementary, Middle School?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I don't know if it got cut off of there on the sheet. When we're not giving Mountain View any money. No.
I apologize.
What we'll do is when we send the minutes out, we'll add Mountain View to the chart. I know that I'm not going to speak for it right now without me being able to see it. And it's funny how you go through this, and we have a whole other document that outlines each cost of everything we were trying to summarize this for you guys. But we do have that piece on there, so we'll make sure it's on there so you can see it. Thank you for pointing that out to us.
Yes, thank you very much. Apologize. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. And I think that's it. So we're going to move on to our next presentation. Thank you, Todd. We're going to bring Jason forward. This is our next item. And Mr. Yeager is going to be providing his presentation on the safety portions. We had a long discussion in here before, and there's some specifics to that, and it should be addressing, and obviously you guys brainstormed a lot, so please ask your questions to Mr. Yeager. Thank you.
Cool. Well, good to see everybody. A couple familiar faces, so that's nice. And I, too, wore my holiday sweater. It's indicative of what I got for Christmas last year, which was coal. We're going to run through this. I get it that safety is like that buzzword of the last few years, you know, obviously for good reasons and so forth. But I wanted to spend some time just kind of giving some insight onto why we picked the items that we did, what we do for safety through the district right now, and kind of how we see that going forward. I know that a lot of times you hear things like you can't put a price on the safety of our, you know, our kids and our staff and so forth, but unfortunately vendors can, and they do, right? And so that still leaves us with that gap of figuring out, okay, well, how do we spend the money that we have or can get and so forth, and what does that look like? And I'll get into some of the other points, but I think is how do we sustain that as well, and so we'll get into some of that. Some of the reasoning, the rationale that we go into, and you know, there's tons of groups like this. Hopefully some of these look familiar to you. For instance, I know in one of the board meetings, both this year and last year, we talked about PASS. It's the Partner Alliance for Safe Schools. It's actually a large organization nationwide that has a checklist, like lots of people do, on the types of things that you could be doing to make sure that your schools are safe. At that time, we talked about the fact that there's about 4 tiers, and you know, the majority of our items are in that tier 2, tier 3, and then why we wouldn't do some tier 4s and so forth. Again, the whole point is that we look at all these things and we try to say, all right, can we do more? What are we doing? Is it effective? And then go from there. And so when you look at most of these, if you go back in your research, you can kind of see that we hit the mark on a lot of things. Obviously, again, there's opportunities for one-time money and opportunities to make things better. But this is, in general, some of the starting points that we utilize when trying to determine what we can and can't do for safety. Some of the other things I start to think about, too, is, you know, a lot of things these last couple of years, everybody's going into subscription-based programs and projects and equipment and all that. And I really dislike that. Obviously, you know, it's great for one-time money when you can implement it, but if you can't sustain it 10 years down the road because it gets too expensive to continue to pay those subscription fees, then what exactly are you buying? And so, again, I know that it's easier said than done to stay away from those, but we try to do some of that. We try to look at things that aren't overhead heavy. Again, we already have staffing shortages. To implement some type of program that requires an extra 15 to 20 people to run it just doesn't really make sense for our district. And then obviously as well, I think sometimes, you know, less is more, right? When we hold our employees accountable, when we hold our community accountable, when we are doing the right things at the right times, you know, there's a lot of very easy things to do to make sure that things are safe. One of the things we always talk about our locked door policy and culture is that, again, it's fantastic, right? I can buy a door that has an iris scanner on it and, you know, fingerprint and all that stuff, but then somebody goes around and leaves it open, then what good did it do, right? And so those are the types of things that we also need to consider to look at as well. And we want to make sure that the community understands that we're looking to be responsible with any of the money that we might get for these projects. And then layered approach, right? The harder that we make it, and we talked about, I'll get in these next couple slides here, you know, we hardened our front offices, we did some window coverings, things like that, obviously keeping doors locked, gates locked. The harder we make it for somebody to come in and harm us, the better, right? And so sometimes, again, it's not something extremely robust, it's just you slow them down enough or somebody confronts them at any of those stages in the game and we can prevent something that would be serious. So just again, a real touch on some of the things that we've done, and one of the big ones that's not up here is the SRO grants that we obtained through ADE last year and the SSO grants that we obtained through ADE this year. And obviously those are ongoing for a few years and hopefully beyond that, depending on what funding looks like. But just some of the key points on where we started and kind of where we're building from. And then we'll get into, you know, I believe you guys already got these on our previous presentation, just things that we originally last year, year before, kind of things that we thought about that would be good ideas as far as moving safety forward. And so then what I'll do here in the next few slides is talk about what that would look like, how we would get to those different things. And then there's a couple of them we'll touch on that we may already have solutions for. And then obviously we'll have opportunity for questions on maybe why some things didn't make this list or what other things we might be able to consider. So, one of the things that we struggle with is the maintenance yards, the gates there. And part of the reason I say struggle is because there's just a lot of activity that goes in and out of there, obviously maintenance. We have all of our vendors that are delivering for food services, for any of our supplies are getting dropped off and so forth. And so we end up having a balance. Do we give out keys to people who aren't background checked, that are working for some other company, that are now accessing our facilities and dropping stuff off? And what does that look like? Do we have enough staff to open and close gates every time something shows up? Do we have a system in place to where we could quickly access that key back if for some reason that person got in trouble? And so we talk about automatic gate openers. I think it's a really important sector to this. We see those left open a lot, especially like even right now during the day. If you don't know, we leave them closed but unlocked because, again, we don't have enough staff to go open the gates every time somebody needs to drop something off. Or there's a lot of reasons. I won't get into it, but currently that's the status. And then obviously they're locked all night long and through the weekends and holidays and things like that. But having a system that would allow us to quickly identify, one of our camera projects from this year is going to put them on all those gates as well, so we'd be able to see who's coming, use a card reader or use some type of automated system. That's what this would pay for.
Okay, so the approximate cost, and this is for all schools?
Yes, ma'am.
And now, that doesn't include future maintenance of these things that do and will break down?
Correct. Yeah, we did a discussion about a week or so ago, and we did put a little bit of a buffer in there to account for that, extended warranties and some costs. But ultimately, that cost would end up on maintenance at some point in the future. Yes, ma'am. Next one is just kind of standardizing our key card system. We don't have a lot of key cards in our district. We still have a lot of keys. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But of what we do have, they're not necessarily all running on the same system. And so this would be just enough to get all of them standard on the same software system, the same hardware. There's several different vendors that pay for, that install the different mechanisms that have it open, close, go during a fire drill, all those different things. There's 2 or 3 companies that do that. And right now, we would like to get those all on the same platform so that way we can easily manipulate those doors remotely or just on campuses in general. One of the things I put on there is that obviously it would be fantastic to have card readers on every door. I think that's unrealistic at this point in time. And just on a very low cost basis, it's about 18 million if I did my math right. And so that's why something like this, where we're just standardizing what we currently have for 1 million, maybe a little bit more palatable. The next thing is again looking at those areas throughout the district that maybe could benefit from a card access on their exterior doors. I'm thinking mostly for high schools, but there's a lot of K-8 and K-4 applicability as well. But right now, in a lockdown, obviously all of our doors interior for classrooms are locked, and we expect those to be closed and so forth. But you'll notice on the high school, all of those exterior doors that lead to those buildings likely aren't locked because they're left open for passing periods, for kids to go to the bathroom, all those different things. And so in this particular model, we have security guards that are trying to either go quickly lock those, teachers or what have you, and obviously that's not a safe situation for that staff either. And so by, again, looking at those opportunities to add some remote capabilities, that's what this particular slide is about. We're all human, and we've lost a lot of keys over the years. Lost, stolen, broken, just don't know where they're at. And so I don't have the exact timeline on when the last time we rekeyed the district was, but to my loose research, it's at least 15 to 20 years or beyond. So we're well overdue for a rekey, a complete rekey, and this is the approximate cost for that. And so again, when you think about that possible $18 million to do key cards and so forth, I still think there's a lot of value in keys if the system's done properly and maintained and tracked and all those different things, and obviously a lot cheaper. One of the things that we've come across several times in the last couple school years that I've been a part of, and maybe it's not high frequency, but it's definitely high stress for the parents that don't know what happened to their kid when they got off the bus or didn't get on the bus or got off the wrong stop, all those different things. So we were looking at a student management system, and what I want to make sure that I'm really clear on, because it's been labeled different things, it's not a tracking system. It's basically, let's just say I had a laser that went across here, and so when I cross that path, it now puts me in that zone, right? And then as soon as I come back out of that zone, I cross it again. It just knows that I crossed. It doesn't know where I am within that zone, or if I never entered that zone. It just knows that I either got on the bus and then got off, or I'm still on, or never got on in the first place. And so we look at systems like that that can help us, and there is an opportunity to expand this into schools as well. But for right now, I think with the existing systems that we have on our buses, we can implement that fairly quickly, obviously with $427,000 plus or minus, and give us a very good opportunity to know, again, are our kids getting home after they've left our supervision at the schools. And again, as you can see, it could easily be expanded to geofence each campus if you wanted to do that, but we're starting small with the schools. This is one of the items that's very low cost after we started doing some research, and I believe I've got a solution for this that we'll probably take care of this year. There is an ongoing cost for it, and there are other products out there that are a little bit more robust. At the end of the day, we're currently using clipboards to track visitors when they come in and out of our campuses. Clearly not the best we can do, and so this was just one of the solutions that we found for this particular problem. It basically does a sex offender check. It checks against any of the flags that we have in our system as far as custody is concerned, or certain pickups or anything like that. Prints out a sticker with your face on it, tracks it, little flags come off if you've been on campus for too long. Just little extra things that we clearly can't do with a clipboard that we're well behind the time on. Just like with our control access with our key card readers, we have multiple vendors who provide us lockdown systems and emergency response systems. Currently, because of the age of our systems, we're kind of being, I don't know, equipment out, phased out on one of those two vendors. They're asking us to move to a different process. We're more of an analog system right now with a lot of wires and things that have been run. Clearly the future is digital, but the cost to transition to digital is extreme. Our other vendor actually has a dual system that's both an analog and a digital, and allows us to use a lot of our existing parts, and is just as good, if not better. So I would like to again see standardization across that, to see all the systems work the same way no matter where you're at. Kids should know this is what it sounds like when I need to evacuate. This is what it sounds like when I need to lock down. And same thing for parents and staff. No matter where you are on our campus, we'd like to see that operate the same and have them function properly. This one's, I don't want to use the word arbitrary because that's not a good word, but you can see I pulled out two very specific projects that we know exist. I know that as you go around the district, just for instance, over here at Freedom, there's a chain link fence that's just to the south of the maintenance yard, and it's, it locks, that's great, but it's got like a 4-foot hole at the bottom. You can just, go underneath. And, we've got that at a few different locations. I know that the maintenance gate at Cimarron's the same way. And so haven't done specific research to know exactly what fencing needs would be required at each site. But you can see that just looking at the two examples that are up there, for instance, Surprise Elementary, they have an east wall that runs along a trailer park. And they don't really maintenance their wall very well. It falls down. We're constantly trying to repair it, paint it, patch it, all those different things. And so having our own boundary wall in that particular instance would cost us about $80,000. Certainly, if we're able to find that, we would do that. Marley Park has some sections same way. You can either walk over it or walk under it. Because they have a different type of fence around their perimeter. It's a little bit more costly, but that cost only represents about 60 to 70% of their actual fence line, and it's $225,000. So very quickly, if you went to every campus and probably looked at a 200 or 300 section foot of fence, or did some repairs, rust, all those type of upgrades, we could get to those numbers. Also, considering things like do we fence parking lots? Do we make those better? One of the things that we've been trying to do over the last couple of years is encourage single point of entry, and because our campuses are so open, that gets very difficult. And so, again, fencing, some of those things allows us to really kind of push that single point entry. So I think that this 1 to 2 is actually probably on the low side, but because I didn't have specific numbers for every campus, I left it at that. Again, it just kind of goes back to consistency and making sure that first responders or anybody that needs to come to our campuses can get to where they need to go quickly and know where they're going and how to get there. It's just something that all of the fire departments end up doing. They do mapping of our buildings. However, they do that when the school's built. If there's any changes or layouts or different things like that, those need to be updated over time. Currently, the district does not really have any of these maps. We rely on first responders to provide those for us, but in this particular instance here, there's some bleed over between our planning through Kevin, our maintenance through Todd. If we were able to map all of our current buildings as they exist now, they have interactive where you can pull it up, you can see the room, you can do a rotate, you can do all those different things. But beyond that, it's also labeling, right? And so one of the things that first responders have asked us is like, that's great. We like being in your schools. We like walking around and knowing the layouts, but then I get in a classroom, and yes, I knew what door I was in when I walked in, but now I turn around, I can't remember. Is it 513 or is it 315, whatever it is. And so this is labeling the inside and outside of every door. This is putting ADA compliant and reflective material on all the exterior doors. So if I was to go in building C, East Room 2, whatever it is, right, and first responders behind me, all they have to do is look for building C, East Room 2, and all those things are labeled out for them. Just the other day, I was trying to get some information for Todd, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that's building C, and then I go over to Willow, I'm like, no, it's not. It's actually that, but it's hard to see them, right? I don't know if you guys have been to the campuses, and yes, we have a nice big, letter or number up there, but a lot of times they're not in advantageous places, or they're covered by trees, and so this is a new, better system that allows us to do that. The other thing is that you'll see on here is that there's an emergency management suite. It's another one of those subscription things that I'm not extremely excited about, but there's some opportunities to do that one time, get the mapping done, get the labeling done. You don't necessarily have to continue that program beyond that, but it does have a hefty 180 up front. Again, I'm sure for those of you who have been on our campuses and just in our different neighborhoods, we see that there's a lot of challenges with cell phone coverage, with internet and so forth. And our IT does put a lot of boosters and so forth in to make sure that all of our Chromebooks and so forth work properly. But again, I'm still seeing a lot of issues, especially at these particular sites. You go into Kingswood with a cell phone, and good luck. It's not happening, right? Mountain View's got some touchy spots. Asante because of its location. So, anyways, those particular boosters aren't overly expensive, but we do have needs throughout the district to make those better. And I think that's probably one of the last two. So, the communication systems, this is one of the things we talked with our security guards here recently. Over the years, schools have bought their own radios, whether it's 10 of them, 20 of them, whatever it is, and they've bought it with the funds that they had available at the time, with whatever radio they thought was most functional at the time. But we don't have a single solution for the entire district. So if at district something horrendous went down and we needed every school to know about it, the only way to do is send an email, send a text, start calling people, phone tree, things like that. Obviously, when towers start to get overwhelmed with calls from the community and so forth, we need other mechanisms that we can communicate, and radio ends up kind of solving that need in a lot of ways. We do have some challenges, being that the radius of our district is over 100 miles, and so that radio solution is still going to be difficult as far as needing repeaters and those different things. But again, I think having a single source system that we'll have a channel deck, and we'll know that Shadow gets 8 channels, and K8s get 4 channels, whatever, a whole comprehensive system, I think would be beneficial. And then lastly, this isn't necessarily an absolute need, but again, when we look at one-time opportunities, the fire department came in and just like with our lockdown systems, realized that they're all old and not necessarily failing, but they're probably going to be phased out in the next year or two. And so the recommendation from the fire department is that we started to replace those, found out that they're about $250,000 per panel. And so obviously that's something that would either take us a long time to do, one school at a time over the course of several years, or have this one-time bulk opportunity here. Again, I'm not great at math. My wife's the accountant, so hopefully she can double-check these numbers for me. There's a range because of the $1 to $2 million on the fencing, and then also taking out the ongoing costs versus the one-time costs. I hate to say this, but I mean I could spend $100 million, but that's not the point, right? Again, the point is, what's most functional, what's our immediate needs, what are the things that I think are going to be the best bang for our buck, which is also not a good term for safety. But our most highest chance for success on that, but not discounting our policies, our procedures, and our culture that we need to continue to build at our district. So, questions on safety?
Can you just tell me what, like a little bit more about what the fire panel is and what that upgrade or replacement?
Yeah. So the fire panel is it's this big box that's typically in the front office or nearby, and it's just every single room that has a smoke detector, every hallway, and it just any time that something goes off, that's where they go to figure out where those alerts come from. And so it's that wiring that runs everywhere throughout the campus, and that's what really drives up the cost. I mean, I can go to Home Depot and get you a panel for $500, but it's it's putting it in that's the cost. Yeah. You guys are taking it easy on me. Sweet. Well, then I will back out slowly.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Yes. We knew there was going to be a heavy night. Actually, the last 2 meetings have been heavy information. So, that's was a chance for us to see exactly what those, what the types of items, things that were brainstormed in here. We wanted to be very upfront in that element of get you some good cost to that, of, all the items that were placed on our flip chart. So we went back, studied those, and made sure to bring that information in. This really brings us to our 4th item on really a summary to the bond and override piece. And I will say that obviously we went over, Mary Dell went over override with us and where we're at, on the calendar for that. We saw the survey side to that, and what they would ask related to that to get information. The bond is a little bit more, more in depth with that piece because obviously there was some questions. Obviously, you can do on the survey. We saw all the items of presentations related to that. And now we're talking about really the summary of that. So I'm gonna let Mary Dell speak to that. At the end, what we really need is to hear some thoughts and discussion. This is not a decision and action item. This is really, we need to hear collectively from the group some suggestion on what do you think based on what we heard from Paul earlier of the amount that we would even put on that survey to get a good gauge. And so I'll let Mary Dell speak to what we have currently, what we've presented to you, and then you guys can add to that.
Thank you, Craig. So just briefly, this is just a recap between the last 2 meetings. The previous one and tonight's. And so if you recall, the bus replacements was replacing those various buses to get us to update the aging fleet. Just that amount that we presented, this included both regular education and special education. It didn't include activity buses. It did not include activity buses. And so when we reviewed that information, if you recall, that was about 17 million, and that would just get us to replace those that are 15 years or older. That would just get us up to current standards. The new K-8 school, as mentioned last time, and then just again revisited today, the next two, 35 million and 10 million. So when we were looking at that bottom line, the question earlier was, is a high school completely separate? And yes, so this doesn't even account for constructing a new high school. This would just be poising the district in a manner in order to, look at that towards the future. This would just be to secure the land so that is something that you consider in the future. Facility renovations was discussed by Todd tonight, so that included the 28 million, I believe was the amount that we discussed as far as the high priority renovation needs. That included the chillers, the cooling towers, flooring, roofing, weatherization, et cetera. And then in addition, that included the 15 million on the various restroom facilities that were identified as a high need, as well as the 5 million for the DHS auditorium upgrade. The safety and security is just what Mr. Yeager presented right now, so that would be the full amount for all the various projects that he identified, bringing our total to about $127 million. So that is the amounts. Hopefully we've provided enough data and detail, have been able to answer your questions on that. It is a figure that I feel like we've been able to provide sufficient detail and rationale on where we're getting that figure from. It's not a number that just kind of came out of nowhere. I think we've been able to break down specifically a lot of these. And so I think this is the time for the committee to have that conversation and see, just in all of the presentations you've been provided, what stands out as a high need. Is that amount reasonable on what we presented as being a high need? Or are there some items that maybe need to take a back seat? So kind of opening it up for committee discussion at this point.
And one other piece I wanted to add to it is that as we worked through the process, it was very important to us that we took exactly what was shared in here and then we put cost to it and we presented just very transparently, this is what, if you went exactly what was all on the list, here it is, that obviously is always up for debate. And so what we're doing here tonight is really not saying, hey, this is the amount we're going on. This is a chance for you guys to offer any opinions to, what do you think we should say to the community? What do you think that number, that if you ask that in a question, what should you do? And so we'd like to hear those thoughts to that because I think it's really important.
127, the bottom line, that 127 million would be over, that's total need right now, but in theory spread over 5 years, you said? Or what's the time frame for that, Mary Dale? So
typically bonds are paid out over another about 15 to 20 years is the repayment structure on those. So when let's say you're authorized to sell up to $127 million bonds, then usually they have series of bonds that you sell kind of in chunks. And so that's what usually you use to fund your various projects. But ultimately then it's just like a mortgage. You may have received the funds in order to go purchase it, but now you do have a repayment process, and that's usually about 15 to 20 years is the standard average for school districts to pay those back.
Okay, so here's my 2 cents, and this is just my perspective. I just want everybody to keep in mind the election in 2023, we just had it. And by the way, this is great work. All this is good. I want to remind everyone that Litchfield bond passed by 76 votes. Alafria bond barely passed. Okay. Now, Dysart is doing a much better work in construction of the bonds, much more transparent in construction of the bond than Litchfield and Alafria ever did. Those bonds barely passed. Barely. I'm reading the tea leaves of the community. It gets really hard to pass. I think it gets hard to pass this bond if it goes over 100. The further above 100 million it goes, the more difficult it is for these voters to pull a trigger. That's just my thought. That's just where I'm looking at the voters out there in the West Valley. So just keep that in mind. Again, that's just my perspective. But the further we go above 100 million, the more difficult politically it might be for voters to pull the trigger on this. So, all right, thank you.
And just for context,
Thank you.
have the results on the election. So Litchfield Elementary, they did ask for a $100 million bond. It did pass 50.2%. And then Agua Fria's was $197 million, and it passed 51.5%. So very close. Agua Fria was $197 million, pass with a 51.5% yes, and Litchfield was $100 million, pass 50.2% yes.
Absolutely, and I think that information is needed. The other part, I just wanted to remind everybody, because I thought it was really important what Paul said earlier, because it'd be nice to say, when he said, well, how about 90? How about 100? How about, it'd be nice to actually, but obviously that's not, you can't play that game because, and he explained that, and I don't want to get back into that, but I think that's why we're saying that what number, based on the 2-figure, 3-figure, I think is a really important point for the group to consider.
I think for me, like all of these are key points, and it just seems like they all came due at the same time. So it's not like we could push it off 4, 5, whatever. Like they all just came due at once, and I don't feel like we can get around, like we need this for the kids. Like I don't feel like we can get around this. It just came due all at once, not like years.
Good point. I think something too where Dysart is unique is when we look back at that timeline of when we were going through the hypergrowth, we built them all at the same time. So when you're now at the 15-20 year, it's all at the same time. Yep.
I also think about one of the first meetings where we talked about the budgets for all of the other school districts and how Dysart's done a very good job of paying off their bonds. Now, I think the money here is great, and it would be great to get the high school land. I don't know if there's a representative here for Asante, but I know eventually they are going to need a high school. And, getting the land is one thing, but if they can't get the money for, what are they going to do? Pay for more buses to ship them? So I honestly don't have an issue, because you're right, everything is coming due. We have to get all of this paid for, but I think maybe even pushing it so that there's enough money to make sure that there is a high school. And Asante, I was going over the notes from didn't see the last meeting, but I saw how much growth there is in Asante. So I think that making sure that there is a high school up there would be a priority. So.
I did talk to the principal at the Asante School. I do live up there. Land is going real quick up there, so there's not much that's left there to be purchased. So now would be the time to buy the high school land. She's also concerned with the K-8 elementary. I don't know if it's passed through the school committee yet. The re-bordering of the schools, that they are overflowing with the K-8. In that school, they do need another school, and within 5 years, it's not like the high school is going to be built or the elementary school is going to be built in 6 months. It's going to take time, so the Band-Aid fix is only a Band-Aid fix until everyone is moved in, the development and everything else. And the buses, I think they need that too, because they are going a long distance to get up. They do have students in the Whitman area, so down 60. So they're even picking up people that far. So I think that everything on here should be on here. As for pricing, I mean, you guys came up with the pricing, so it's nothing I don't think that we can really negotiate with on how to pick it unless we're taking something off of this list.
And I want to, Patrick, I'll bring it over to you. Just a quick couple comments to those pieces. The boundary piece is being proposed and looked at very closely right now as far as that element. So there is movement because of the overflowing of Asante Preparatory, and you're correct in that piece. I'm going to go ahead and interject this part right now. On January 20th, I think you opened the door for me on that one, but on January 20th is a Saturday that we're going to be sending you the information on, is our morning field trip day that we're going to send all the committee members meeting here, getting on a bus. I will tell you that right now we have planned to go see the buses. We want to show you our bus fleet. We want to take you to the auditorium at Dysart High School. We want to show you the failing chillers at Marley. We want to show you the walk at Willow. We would go to Shadow too, but we just feel like, we're strategizing. And I think, there's other pictures. I think you measuring it will be great information to announce on the bus. And then we're going to do a little bit of we're going to show you what it's like to get up to Asante. And that field trip from Willow to Asante, you're going to get to see that from that area, and you're going to get to see some of the areas around Asante as our field trip. So a couple hours to do that, and then back here to get everybody on there. So we basically have it set up is around 3 to 3.5 hours full time total to make sure it's and we'll take care of everybody in that day. But wanted to mention that. I also wanted, the second thing is I wanted to mention that things that when I was working with Mr. Blooder on the pricing of elements, he kind of looked at me each time I said how much stuff costs. He's like, yeah, well, how much cost is going up, because we all know with what's happened in the construction industry and how that's inflated. But we know that we're not presenting it that way to you guys, though. We're showing you what the cost is as best we can and being as conservative as we can with the cost, we could on there. The only other comment I wanted to make too is that, again, we're not making a decision, and so it could be advantageous, as I'm hearing some people talking here, and I know we still have more comments to get to. If you put the money on the survey that's low and you get a great response, that's the number right. If you a little bit more of the crystal ball, and I don't know, is if you put the money up there higher and on the survey you don't get as good results, but you still want, you're like, we still got to do this, does that give you indication to go lower? So I'm thinking along those lines of how that might be perceived, so it's just something to consider.
Okay, so you're literally segueing in what I was going to mention. So I was thinking the same thing. Here's my question to the committee members. What are you going to take off that list, right? Which is kind of what we were getting at. I'm going to, just speaking for me, just Pat, that everything on there is important. I mean, there's literally every single briefing we got, there's not a single one where I'm like, that could probably wait. There just really isn't. Everything's coming to it once. I think a reasonable voter, if you will get that. I think they're going to understand. And when I'm hearing the numbers from Marydale and others about how much they were asking for, yes, they barely passed, but at the same time, I do agree that we're doing a good job putting this whole thing together. I mean, hats off for the research behind this and the detailed agenda. I just wish there was a way that they could take what we've all seen and each individual voter say, dig this, and then they have, oh, okay, now I get it, as opposed to, just a quick little short overview. So personal opinion, I think everything's on there is necessary. I get the number over the 100 million thing. I do agree with that. But at the same time, I think it's easy to understand the growth and how much we're exploding around here. I think that 127 number is a decent number, all things considered. Pat's opinion.
I have a question in regards to how much information the community actually receives, because we've seen an abundant amount of information. What are we able to share with the community in terms of what we've learned? Because everyone is not going to be at a board meeting to get the information. So how does that information go about getting out to the community?
It was funny you were saying that, because I'm hearing over here, can we get our public relations and Ryan's genius to make us a commercial. One thing aspect is that there's this meeting is obviously being streamed. Any information you have the right to share. Okay, that's one part of it. I think that's something that we will take back, and I think it's something that as we debrief at the end of this, presenting to the board, I think that's okay to even say that in your presentation. That this is what we stated. We want to have ways that we can share the information with the community, and that could be that we task at hand, take it to PR, and say, hey, how would we best do that? But all of you have every right to share information. The most important thing, and I've been doing this now for 29 years, is that it's an element where, and lived in Arizona my whole life, and watching the schools and communities, if you don't do this as transparent as possible with your community members and be very, what we've done is we've been frugal in how we've presented. I know that there's cost to this stuff, but we're also saying this is what actually will help in the needs of making sure that these buildings can operate, and we're going to be able to get our kids to and from safely and make it a great experience for them in our community. So that part is important to us. I've heard from a lot of people in here. It's not something we would take a vote on, but I would ask in general as we talk about this, do we feel comfortable in this putting that amount of 127 out there and seeing what the survey says? If we don't get good feedback, I'm with you, Johnny. I say if you don't get it, it's going to tell you. Like, hey, and saying, but we still have need, guys. Are we really going to back that off? And maybe that's the work of the public, publicizing it and doing some of that effort. Here you go.
Just something for the PR, like maybe doing the school construction map and just kind of outlining, hey, this is why we're asking for these things. Some of these are this many years old and can't wait. Like, I think putting that out to the public will give a better, okay, that's why they're asking for that much.
I think just some visuals is always a good thing. Yeah. And right. Right. And we do have a Bond and Override Committee website page that it's a link to just the process and the timeline, all the various meetings that we've currently been holding, the ones in the future scheduled. But we can certainly talk to our PR department. Is it a good idea? It attaches the meeting agendas, but we don't necessarily have the presentations attached to them. So would it be a good idea to go back and insert, PDFs of the various presentations that we've discussed with the group under all of those different meetings? So because otherwise you have to then go to the actual streaming video rather than looking at them. Okay. Good feedback.
You talked about, in terms of the fact finding, you talked about the bonds that were voted on for Agua Fria and Litchfield. Do you have information on the percentages of their schools that graded at an A level? So for ours, it was like 18. So I'm just curious as to what their percentages were as to compared to the Dysart Unified School District. I think that could also help go a long way towards convincing the district to approve the bond.
Yeah, the information is publicly available. I don't have that. I just have the actual override or the election results. But again, I think it is just really telling your story as a district and really just publicizing yourself and really speaking, because if you're not going to speak well about how great you are, who will, So I think that is part of like a great job that Dysart does, and we can certainly work with our PR department as the message goes out. This is things that maybe people don't know, just kind of that elevator speech about Dysart, and really this year to have 18 schools and be an A-rated district, that's not something our neighboring districts necessarily have. So it's a great thing. The things that we've been able to do with what we have is awesome.
I think I would reiterate that point, and I will tell you, and I've worked very extensively with bonds and overrides over the last 20 years. In this type of capacity of ways, it hasn't been in Dysart, but I can tell you that the number one thing that I think is extremely important in that element is what you said. You have to, and I'm going to say two things. Number one is it's what Mary Dell shared at the beginning of this whole start of the committee, is you need to show fiscal responsibility of the district and that money is in the classroom. And number two, you better show that your schools are successful, and putting the A ratings out there is extremely important. Because what Paul shared with us in that survey element was he said, hey, people look at perception of education and they might have, but then they'll talk about their own school and their own community. And that's an important thing too, because people have to feel good about their own school, and that's how, that's really goes a long way in that process.
I agree with a lot of what's been said about, I don't know what I would cut from this, but my question is, so the $10 million for the high school land, what would be the plan for actually building the high school if that money isn't included in this bond?
I can tell you, Mary Dell, nope, you do it, because I think you've done it before, so you've been involved in that process, how it works from the state level.
Well, Yeah, so once it's an entire, because again, it goes with the SFB and whether or not we meet a certain point of, do we have the capacity, or do they think that we're already exceeding our capacity in order to be able to fund a school? And so I know that we've done a great job of submitting, when we submit our capital plans, of are we getting to that point? Because again, as was shared at our previous presentations, it's not necessarily they look as a district overall, do you have capacity, not are you just bursting at the seams in one area. So that is something, though, we do provide just estimates on what we think our student enrollment's going to be, and so does that trigger for them to be able to supply and fund a school? And so we are certainly looking at that and applying for that, and if we eventually get to that trigger, that would be something that the state could be able to provide, and we look at that as a possible source. But otherwise, if the state doesn't provide that, you're again looking at a possible bond. So there's a couple different financing options there.
That has happened, is that school districts have been in that place where they've gotten the land, they're busting, and then they did not get the assistance from the state, and then the district had to make another decision: do we ask for more money? That's not the way you want it to be. I will tell you, though, in the conversations is that SFB, one of the priorities is when you get to the high school conversation in an area, it's usually because there is such a demand for that. That's why the funding usually is that districts are more strapped with usually coming up with funding to take care of K-8, the smaller buildings, versus a high school, which is much more like a city. And there's that element that you have to consider. Like, we talk about $10 million for land. It's not I think Shadow's 55 acres, and Dysart High School is 61 acres. Maybe it's 59. I don't know. You know what? I shouldn't sound like I'm an expert on the land. But you're talking about land in that area, as we heard, is very hard to come by. We have talked to the city, and you're looking at some places that we might have an opportunity for, as we've looked at them, and you're talking about a much smaller number of acres, and building up is what would happen. So that'd be the other side of it. But to answer your question, you really do. I mean, there definitely is a need that's presented in that community up there right now with the growth. I do believe, and parents are we're hearing it from Asante, and I mean, that's hard. That's hard when you tell them, your kid's been going to Asante for the last, 5 or 6 years, and and then you may need to be bused over to another school next year because there's no room. So I mean, that's just the reality, and other districts have dealt with it before. So, and I know that's I say it, I don't mean nonchalant about it. I'm just saying that's a tough one for parents. So, all right. Can I get I need to hear if there's anybody, we want to make sure we asked that one last time. Is there anybody that's opposed to the number of 127 going to the survey? That's just for the survey purposes. Is there anybody that's opposed to that thought process at this point? And just get the info. All right. We will take that back to Paul, and obviously I'll take that to the superintendent, and then we'll be meeting just briefly afterwards on, just because we have a board meeting this Thursday. We'll want to be able to share with the board some of our conversation give them a summary. So I think at this point, and I'm over again, so Mary Dell keeps adding up the minutes. I need to ask for a motion to adjourn, and then when you say you motion, if you could tell us your name so that I can't see very well right now. I think I'm getting tired. A motion to adjourn. Jason's motioning to adjourn. Randall is seconding that we can adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Thank you guys very, very much for your help tonight. And committed and spokespeople, if you could stay back for just a minute.